I recently switched over to a MacBook Pro with Apple Silicon for music production, and today I want to not only share my experience, but also some tips that will hopefully make your transition a little bit better. Before we start, if you're a Studio One user, don't forget to download my free productivity toolbar. This is a macro toolbar that sits at the top of your timeline for easy access and combines a bunch of Studio One's production functions into time-saving one-click buttons. The productivity toolbar is completely free, so if you want to start speeding up your Studio One workflow today, then click the first link down below to get access. Okay, so honestly, I was debating whether or not to actually make this video, but ultimately decided to go for it because although I am all set up and running now, this had to be one of the most stressful computer swaps I have ever done. Granted, some of that stress did come from my own negligence, but nonetheless, I thought this could serve as a guide to help others who are also in the process of transitioning to another computer for production, and specifically one with Apple Silicon. So then here is my experience, what I learned, and ultimately what I would do differently if I had to do this over again. All right, so my very first tip, and this is where I went completely wrong, is to do a time machine backup and then copy that over. Don't try to be cute like me and move things manually. I promise this will only make you lose a ton of time and make you want to pull hair. Now, the reason that I wanted to do things manually was because I wanted to declutter. I had my last computer for about 4 years, and you know how this goes. Over time, we tend to accumulate a ton of stuff that we really don't need. So my initial idea was to start fresh and that way really evaluate what I needed. The problem is that transferring over plugins and software one by one can be a really big pain in the butt, depending on how much stuff you own and how you have it set up. Not only that, but you also have to take into account other software and computer preferences. Aside from Studio One, I run a ton of other software to do what I do, including my screen recording software, my Stream Decks, my Logitech mouse and keyboards, my video editing software, a virtual audio patch software, among many others. And starting from scratch meant that I had to manually set those preferences back up. If I had to do this over again, I would have instead opted for running some sort of hard drive utility to analyze my hard drive and help me delete stuff before backing that up onto a time machine. They're not sponsoring this, but one of my favorites that I've been using for a few years now is DaisyDisk. It is a paid app at $10, but it is so worth it for what it does. DaisyDisk has a super user-friendly interface, and not only does it show you how much space you have left at a quick glance, but if you scan your hard drive, it also shows you a super detailed view of exactly what is on your computer and where to find it. Once you locate what you want to get rid of, you can simply drag it down to the trash area on the bottom left and delete. It's also really good at helping you reclaim that space macOS randomly hogs up, and the best part is that it also works on external hard drives. So yeah, my first tip is to use something like DaisyDisk to clean up your hard drive, do a time machine backup, and then copy that over. I believe you could also just connect both computers and do a Mac-to-Mac transfer, but the main idea still stands. Don't do this manually. Now, once I was all transferred over, the very next thing I did was fire up Studio One. If you're a regular viewer of this channel, then you know that Studio One is my preferred DAW, so having this work was my top priority. Surprisingly enough, this was actually super simple. If I remember correctly, in the beginning when Apple chips were first introduced, you had to open up Studio One with Rosetta for it to even work because they weren't finished with the native Apple version, but I am happy to report that this is no longer the case. At least in my experience, Studio One opens up and runs beautifully in native Apple Silicon, so that was a relief. Good things don't last forever though. Although Studio One itself ran great, some plugins did not. I have purposely been putting off switching to Apple Silicon for a while because I didn't want to run into issues with plugin compatibility, and although a ton of plugin manufacturers have worked things out, not all of them have. After opening up Studio One, I noticed that quite a few of my plugins were missing, and I tried dang near everything to troubleshoot, from making sure that my file paths were correct, to clearing my blacklist, to resetting my plugin settings, and nothing. It was only until I reached out to PreSonus support, who, by the way, were super quick and helpful, shout out to Lawrence, that they mentioned that the missing plugins might be a result of some third-party companies still not being fully compatible with Apple Silicon. After opening up Studio One in Rosetta mode, all my plugins came back and we were good to go. Now, if you don't know what Rosetta is, from my understanding, it is essentially a bridge software that allows you to open Intel apps in Apple Silicon computers. I'm not quite sure about this one, so feel free to comment down below, but from what I could tell, Rosetta comes included by default in new Macs, or at least prompts you to download it or something. Again, I don't remember the details, but I do remember seeing a Rosetta pop-up when I first set up my MacBook that I agreed to without reading. In any case, to open up Studio One in Rosetta mode, all you have to do is open up the Finder, head to your Applications tab, and once you locate Studio One, simply right-click and select Get Info. Finally, from here, it is as easy as checking off the Open in Rosetta button. I don't know when all third-party plugins will be updated, so for the time being, I will continue to run Studio One in Rosetta mode, and I suggest you do the same. All right, the last thing I want to talk about here is macOS Ventura. If you do music production as well, you know that we don't update operating systems when they get released. Usually, new OSs are never immediately compatible with our stuff, so I personally always wait at least a year to update just to be sure. Granted, it's been about a year and things should have been ironed out, but you just never know. Well, I am happy to announce that at least for me, there weren't any major issues. Once I got the plugin situation handled, everything has been running pretty smoothly and I have no complaints. The only thing that I will warn you about is that if you run any universal audio hardware, you will have to go through some extra steps just to get console working. From my understanding, Apple has increased their security policy on these new Macs, which is great, but that also means that you can't just download stuff that isn't from the App Store as easily. To get my UAD interfaces working right, I had to follow some extra steps that required booting up the Mac in recovery mode and turning off these extra security settings. It sounds more complicated than it really is, so don't worry. UAD did a great job at documenting the process in an article that I'll leave linked down below. So friend, that was my experience transitioning to Apple Silicon. Some roadblocks, but ultimately we got it done. Now, do you know who else gets it done? DistroKid, the sponsor for this video. DistroKid is a music distribution service that helps you get your music into all major streaming platforms like Apple Music, Spotify, TikTok, Instagram, and many more. Not only is it super easy to use, but at $23 a year for unlimited uploads, it is also by far one of the most affordable distributors on the market. Aside from distribution though, one of the things that I love about DistroKid is how hassle-free they make the entire process. For example, did you know that if you want to upload a cover of a song, you have to make sure that the owner of that song gets paid? This can be a bit of a hassle, but with DistroKid, the process is super easy. On the upload screen, all you have to do is click the Another Artist Wrote It button under the songwriter portion and you're set. From there, DistroKid will automatically file your cover song license and submit payments to right holders so you don't have to do anything yourself. After that, if you ever need to access your cover song licenses for whatever reason, it is as easy as heading over to your settings and clicking on the cover song licenses section. So then if you're ready to spread your music or covers out to a broader audience, then consider signing up to DistroKid by heading over to ivancalderon.com/DistroKid or clicking the link down below for 7% off your first year. But that's it for me, friend. Hopefully this was helpful, and if it was, don't forget to like and share with a friend. That really helps me out. Thank you so much for your time, and I'll see you on the next one.